We're going to begin this hour with that breaking news. Former Vice President Dick Cheney has died. He was 84 years old. He was one of the nation's most powerful vice presidents and a polarizing figure in U.S. politics, serving alongside Republican President George W. Bush for 2 terms. He was the chief architect of the war on terror in Iraq. Despite a lifetime as a hardline conservative, Cheney has faced backlash from his own party in recent years over his criticism of President Trump. In a statement announcing his death, Cheney's family said he was surrounded by loved ones when he died of complications from pneumonia, adding he was a great and good man who taught his children and grandchildren to love our country and to live lives of courage. NBC News Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent Andrea Mitchell has more.
To the end, he never wavered, defending the Iraq War and the harsh interrogation tactics that defined his vice presidency, making him a lightning rod for critics, but an icon to conservatives.
Thank you all very much. Knock it off. A welcome like that's almost enough to want to make me run for office again.
Dick Cheney always spoke his mind, justifying interrogation practices later judged to be torture.
They were legal, essential, justified, successful, and the right thing to do.
In the end, his advice was even rejected by the commander-in-chief when George W. Bush fired Cheney's closest ally, Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld. It was a turn of events no one would have predicted when Richard Bruce Cheney became the 46th Vice President of the United States.
So help me God.
He had already served as the youngest White House Chief of Staff under Gerald Ford, a powerful congressman from Wyoming, and Secretary of Defense under the first President Bush. Born in Nebraska, Cheney's family moved to Casper, Wyoming when he was a boy. He won a scholarship to Yale but quit, finally graduating from the University of Wyoming and marrying his high school sweetheart, Lynn, a leading conservative author and commentator.
The man I married has a very interesting mind. Problems get redefined, and you find yourself thinking about things in new ways.
The Cheneys had 2 daughters, Mary, mother of 2, whose same-sex marriage was strongly supported by her parents well before the Supreme Court weighed in, and Liz, mother of 5 and her father's political heir, elected to Congress from Wyoming just like he was, but incurring the wrath of Donald Trump for standing up against the former president and investigating the January 6th insurrection. In 1989, as the first President Bush's Secretary of Defense, Dick Cheney became known as the cool-handed leader of the first Gulf War against Saddam Hussein.
3 o'clock Thursday morning in the Gulf, the armed forces of the United States began an operation at the direction of the president.
During the Clinton years, Cheney made millions as CEO of Halliburton, the Dallas-based oil equipment company, until George W. Bush asked him to lead the search for a running mate in 2000, and Cheney ended up taking the job himself. He quickly became the most visible take-charge vice president in memory, briefing the press, briefing Congress, briefing the president.
The main reason I'm there is to serve him. He needs people around him who care only about his success, who are prepared to give him honest advice and never sugarcoat it.
He helped shape a cabinet some said looked more like Cheney's than Bush's, in a White House that for a while appeared to be a co-presidency. Cheney was the prime mover behind the theory, later proven wrong, that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction.
We know he's been absolutely devoted to trying to acquire nuclear weapons, and we believe he has, in fact, reconstituted nuclear weapons.
Contrary to CIA reports, Cheney also linked Saddam to al-Qaeda and 9/11 and predicted Iraq would fall quickly.
Things have gotten so bad inside Iraq from the standpoint of the Iraqi people. My belief is we will, in fact, be greeted as liberators.
When the violence escalated into civil war, Cheney was blamed. There were political setbacks, an embarrassing quail hunting accident when he shot and wounded a companion. More seriously, the conviction of his closest aide, Scooter Libby, for lying to a grand jury about the outing of a CIA operative. Throughout his public life, Cheney also battled heart disease, suffering his first heart attack in 1978 during his first run for Congress. Just days after being elected vice president, he underwent a procedure to open a clot and soon after a pacemaker. Once out of office, Cheney underwent a successful heart transplant. Still, to the end, he stuck to his deeply conservative roots, making him one of the most powerful and controversial vice presidents in recent American history. Andrea Mitchell, NBC News, Washington.
Andrea, thank you for that look back at his life and legacy, and we will have more coverage throughout the show. Now let's switch to Election Day. Voters from coast to coast head into the polls today to cast their ballots. There are 3 races drawing national attention this morning. There are governor's races in Virginia and New Jersey, and then also this mayoral race right here in New York City. There's also a ballot measure out in California that could reshape the state's congressional map, therefore impacting future elections. Well, these off-year races offer the first glimpse into the pulse of the electorate less than a year into President Trump's second term and 1 year out from the midterms. NBC News reporter Gary Grembach joins us now from Washington with more on today's key races. Gary, good morning. A lot going on. We're going to start here in New York City. It is rare for a mayoral race to gain such national attention, even for a city like New York. But there's a few things at play here. Democratic Socialist Zohran Mamdani's campaign, these promises that he's made, some controversial, and then this super quick rise to prominence following the primary that got him a lot of attention. Then, of course, he's running against a former governor who had a scandal of his own. Now, a lot of people here set to head to the polls. We've actually seen record early voting numbers here in New York City. Tell us each candidate's final message to voters ahead of today.
Yeah, voters are voting. Happy Election Day to you and yours, Savannah. We'll start with Zohran Mamdani there in New York City mayor's race. He was reaching voters where they are over the past couple of days. He was going to a Knicks game talking to voters. He went to a gay bar at 1 a.m. talking to those types of voters. And he was also at an overnight taxi stand at LaGuardia, really getting out the vote in every part of the city at any hour of the day. Then you have Andrew Cuomo, of course, former governor who resigned in disgrace after being accused of sexual harassment, which he denies. He does have the support of some unlikely folks, people like Elon Musk, people like Stephen Miller, and President Donald Trump, who said it would be very important to vote for Andrew Cuomo because he does not want to see Zohran Mamdani in the mayor's seat in his former hometown of New York City. And then on the Republican side, you do have Curtis Sliwa. He's the Guardian Angels founder. He's somebody who's big on supporting getting rid of street crime in the city there in New York City. Savannah.
Gary, what has New York City native President Trump had to say about this race? We know that he's weighed in quite a few times now in different ways. Also, by the way, worth noting, the Republican candidate, Curtis Sliwa, is running as this distant third. What has President Trump said about that?
Yeah, so President Trump has actually not endorsed the Republican in the race. He's supporting, based on a Truth Social post and other movements, he is supporting Andrew Cuomo in the race. He does not want to see a Democratic Socialist leading New York City. He said that would be very bad for the city of New York, Savannah.
Also, Gary, I mentioned we're watching these governor races in Virginia and New Jersey. Who's on the ballots in those states, and what are some of the headlines out of those races?
Yeah, starting with New Jersey, you've got former state representative Jack Ciattarelli and running against Mikey Sherrill. She is the congresswoman from New Jersey. She's looking to become the governor of New Jersey. And one of the big issues there is affordability across the state. The cost of living in New Jersey, something that both candidates have been focusing on throughout their campaigns. And Republican voters in the state are really upset with how Governor Phil Murphy handled COVID issues several years ago back in the state of New Jersey. And they're really looking for a change and trying to turn a new leaf, perhaps, with Jack Ciattarelli leading the run there. Over in Virginia, you've got current Lieutenant Governor Winsome Earl Sears running against Abigail Spanberger, a former CIA officer and former congresswoman from Virginia. This race is going to make history no matter what happens, because for the first time in history, a woman will be leading the Commonwealth of Virginia. President Trump did hold a tele-rally last night for candidates both in Virginia and in New Jersey. But in Virginia's tele-rally, he did not mention Winsome Earl Sears' name once during the tele-rally. And that's incredibly notable because of the frosty relationship the two have had over the past several years. Back in 2022, Winsome Earl Sears said she thought it was time to move on from Donald Trump. Clearly, President Trump has not forgotten that in this case. And so we will see what happens with all those races across Virginia and New Jersey, Savannah.
And then finally, Gary, let's look out west. We spoke yesterday about the Prop 50 measure that is on the California ballot this year, potential redrawing of the state's congressional maps. This is amid Republican redistricting efforts, specifically in Texas. Walk us through this one and the potential implications.
So this is mid-decade redistricting. We don't often see this because usually it happens right after the census happens around the zeros of the decade. Under these proposed lines that are going to be put on the ballot today in California, Democrats could get up to 5 seats in the House of Representatives that they didn't have before. And with the tight margins here in Washington, every single seat matters, and it could be a very significant role for Democrats to have 5 more seats coming from a state like California. We are seeing this push nationwide. We're seeing it happen in Virginia, of course, not on the ballot, but we're seeing folks try to make this happen in Virginia. We're seeing it happen in Texas and around the country as they try to push this further and further, something that is technically, if it's not on the ballot, unconstitutional. But DNC Chair Ken Martin told me this weekend 2 unconstitutional acts in this case do, in fact, make a right. Savannah?
All right, certainly a conversation there. Gary, thank you very much. Well, tune in, please, to NBC News Now tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern for special coverage of today's election results. We, of course, are going to bring you the latest as polls close, so stay with us right here all night. Well, now let's turn to the White House. A report from Fox News about the targeting of Christians in Nigeria over the weekend led President Trump to create a post on social media threatening military action. The president said he would go, quote, guns a-blazing to completely wipe out Islamic terrorists. Well, that resulted in a scramble inside the White House, according to multiple U.S. officials. We have NBC News senior White House correspondent Garrett Haake joining us now with the very latest. Garrett, good morning. Before we do get to that, I want to return to our top story, the death of former Vice President Dick Cheney. Have we heard anything about his passing from the White House yet?
Not yet, Savannah. And frankly, I wouldn't expect the words when they do come from this White House to be particularly warm. President Trump has long disagreed politically with Dick Cheney, whether it was on the Iraq War after the fact or on Cheney and Cheney's daughter's opposition to President Trump around January 6th. One of the last communications President Trump sent around Dick Cheney came in September when Cheney said he would vote for Kamala Harris. The president, then a candidate at the time, called him a, quote, irrelevant rhino. So I wouldn't expect particularly warm words on the former vice president's passing from the president when they do come today. All
right, Garrett, thank you for that. Back to what I just mentioned, this news out of Nigeria. So it was nearly 2 weeks ago when Nigeria's military actually killed dozens of militants in response to drone attacks on military bases. We just pulled up a moment ago the president's social post there. He used this strong language. Walk us through how the White House is responding to the president's comments over the weekend and explain what's happening here, how we may get involved.
Yes, it's one of the first time I've seen guns a-blazing in a presidential post, certainly about another nation. Here, the president became aware of what's going on in Nigeria, or at least a version of it from a Fox News story he had seen while traveling on Air Force One, according to 2 senior administration officials. That set off what you accurately described as a scramble inside the White House to come up with options for responding to this. The official White House line is that they're still considering what those options may be, everything from cutting off aid to some kind of military intervention. 2 U.S. officials do tell NBC News that one of the things being considered would be precision drone strikes on some of these Islamist militants inside Nigeria. But it's clear that no formal decision has been made, really just beginning that planning and contingency process with the president's post kind of leading the way for the rest of the administration.
Garrett, also just a moment ago, we were talking with Gary about the president sort of wading in a bit, at least to the New York City mayoral race. But tell us what the White House is watching as this consequential election day unfolds.
Well, look, I think they're going to be watching these gubernatorial races very closely in Virginia and in New Jersey. The president has been perhaps more involved in the New Jersey gubernatorial race. There's a more like-minded, more Trumpy candidate there, if you will. And the White House, I think, is particularly interested in seeing things like how do these more Hispanic and Latino districts in some of these states play in these elections. Remember, the president made huge gains with those constituencies when he was on the ballot in 2024. Folks around Trump, his political advisors, looked at the idea that they were renting those voters to a certain extent. They were renting those voters. They wanted to buy them, make them into Republican voters. This would be one of the first tests of that theory in some of these big statewide races in diverse states, not red states by any stretch of the imagination, not even necessarily purple, but places where they had made inroads and are hoping to, if not expand, at least hold on to those gains as they start pivoting towards thinking about the midterms next year.
Certainly a lot to watch for, including reaction from the White House today. Garrett, thank you very much. Well, Election Day today also marks day 35 of the government shutdown. So that now means that this is tied for the longest shutdown in U.S. history. Senate Majority Leader John Thune, though, says he's optimistic that the impasse in the Senate could end sometime this week. Until then, we do continue to see those long lines and delays at airports as TSA officers work without pay. And while funding for federal food programs hasn't been fully restored, families in need did get some welcome news yesterday. NBC News Chief Capitol Hill correspondent Ryan Nobles has the details.
At Houston's Bush International Airport, massive lines and long waits.
I was quite upset.
Delays are mounting for travelers from coast to coast, with TSA officers and air traffic controllers calling out sick.
Yeah, it's crazy, and there's people outside, which is even crazier, so I'm lucky to be up here.
The Department of Transportation says 84% of delays were due to staffing, compared to just 5% pre-shutdown. Meanwhile, for the millions of Americans on edge about food assistance,
I'm just sad, crushed, and disappointed with the system.
A small reprieve. The Trump administration saying it will comply with a court order and provide half of the funding it typically does for SNAP benefits.
It's a huge relief.
Welcome news for Deborah Haynes, the executive director of Food for Others in Fairfax, Virginia. But she warns this relief is only temporary.
This is definitely still scary. As long as the government is shut down, we never know from one ruling to the next what's going to happen.
Across the country, that need on full display. Manny's Deli in Chicago is offering free food for those in need. A line stretched out the door. In Virginia, SNAP recipient Diego Pineda says he's been carefully managing his food in case his benefits run out.
I just want this to be over. I want them to just agree on something or stop going back and forth because, I mean, at the end of the day, everybody's burden proved their point.
On Capitol Hill, Democrats continue to insist Republicans agree to health care reforms to prevent huge hikes in premiums. Republicans, led by President Trump, are insistent that Democrats must vote to reopen the government first.
Republicans passed a clean continuing resolution. It was nonpartisan. It was a simple bill that would open the full government, and we could do that today.
But Democrats are holding firm, insisting they can't trust Republicans to keep their word.
Unfortunately, they've demonstrated they're not serious about those commitments, so I don't trust that they would actually follow through and do that.
Our thanks to Ryan Nobles for that report. Well, later today, the Senate will vote for the 14th time on the Republican funding bill, which already passed in the House. Let's get you weather now. Heavy rainstorms are set to continue in the Pacific Northwest. For more details, let's check in with Angie Lassman here in studio. Hey, Angie, good morning.
Hi, Savannah. Good morning to you. We've got some more rain, some more snow for our friends out west. Here's what the satellite and radar looks like right now. You can see some of this rain streaming into northern California and stretching back to the mountains across the Intermountain West. And that's kind of going to set the stage for what we'll see through the day today. Some really strong winds centered across parts of the coastal area. But then those rounds of heavy rain will continue to work through this region here as we get through the day today. And then we kind of have this reinforcing cold front and system that's going to push more of that heavy rain onshore. This leaves us with another unsettled day for folks there. The heavy rain and the mountain snow are here to stay for folks across this region. And you can see upwards of 3 inches of rain in some parts of California, especially closer to the coast. That's where you'll see those higher rainfall amounts. Meanwhile, I mentioned those winds. We've got wind alerts up across much of this region. You can see stretching into parts of Nevada and all the way back to the coast. We're talking 40, 50 plus mile per hour winds. Again, closer to the coast, you're going to see those higher numbers. But in those higher elevations, we could see upwards of 50, even 60 mile per hour winds. So again, a little bit of difficulty when it comes to the winds on that side of the country. Similar story on the East Coast as well. We've got to look towards parts of New England where we've got 11 million people under these wind advisories. You can see from Nantucket stretching all the way up into northern Maine. We've got Boston, Portland included in there. And wind gusts 30, 40 miles per hour. And again, closer to the coast is where you're going to see those higher wind speeds. So 40 plus miles per hour, especially the farther north you go, Nantucket, you'll be nearing 50 miles per hour for those top wind gusts through the day today. Meanwhile, we've got this next system. It's going to be a quick mover. It's going to kind of slide across parts of the Midwest today. It's going to bring some showers to the Great Lakes through the evening hours tonight. You can see that here into the overnight hours, and then it slides into parts of the Northeast. That means some showers, some thunderstorms, maybe some high elevation snow, and we'll still see those gusty winds remaining for folks across that region for tomorrow. And if you're looking for the warmer temperatures, well, you got to go to the middle of the country. We've got upper 70s stretched across parts of the southern plains, 85 degrees in Amarillo today. We're talking more than 20-degree temperature bumps from where we should be for this time of year. Low 70s as far north as Omaha, even Chicago running above normal, 62 degrees. And that warmth will move east for tomorrow. We've got a lot of 70s across the Tennessee Valley, across the southeast. We've got some 50s and 60s for the Midwest. Springfield ends up at 66 degrees tomorrow. tomorrow. And then it'll start to cool down the farther north you are as we get into the later part of our work week. It's just 50 degrees by the time we roll into Saturday in Chicago, low 60s for Washington, D.C. The 70s, though, here to stay for folks across the South.
All right. It's been like perfect crispy fall here.
It has.
I love it. I have you to thank.
Listen, I'll take it. When you are thanking the weather person, we take it because it happens so
Otherwise, return to sender.
Exactly.
Thanks, Angela.
We thank you for watching. And remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.